Hi, people. Thank you for stopping by at Building Wealth with Rajeev. If you ever bothered about what makes an exceptional leader, how to progress to C suite, what is the power of intuition and leadership, and how to develop that, and why not many Asians are making to CEO level, you should listen to Andrew Bryant. Andrew is world's leading expert on self leadership. He has authored several bestsellers and coached hundreds of individuals across the globe on their leadership journey. You can find more details about Andrew in my description below. I hope you enjoy the chat. If you like it, please share with your friends. Do comment and follow my channel. You develop C-level executives. Is there a particular definition? What makes a good leader, or what makes an exceptional leader?
It's a $60,000 or $600,000 question. What makes a good leader? It absolutely depends on context. So, in 25 years of writing, researching, and coaching leadership, honestly, I get frustrated with the simplistic LinkedIn or Facebook memes that leaders are like this. The list, in fact, is so long these days, it might as well include leaders can walk on water and turn water into wine. Look, a leader emerges in context. A situation arises and somebody is either designated or emerges as the leader. And if you look at leadership, you could think about it as a three-legged stool. A three-legged stool doesn't wobble. Three things to consider on evaluating: is this person a good leader? Is their leadership style, depending on the context, is it stable or is it volatile? And the motivation and skill set of the people being led. So let me give you an example. If we're at 35,000 feet on an aircraft and the oxygen masks fall from the ceiling, if the captain comes out of the cockpit with participative leadership and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to create some focus groups to see what I should do about this situation," we would all be panicked. Mm-hmm. That is not the right circumstance for participative leadership. It's the circumstances for directive leadership. We want the captain to take charge because we don't have the motivation or the skills to fly the plane. But if you and I are both professionals in our own field, we have experience, we have knowledge, and we have a boss that starts micromanaging us and being directive and saying, "You should do it this way," we are going to want to tell that boss to jump off a cliff. We want a boss to engage us and say, "Hey, you've got some great ideas. Let me create an environment that can exercise those ideas and you can have some ownership and some output." So stop thinking about leadership as a singularity of persona. I mean, I'm British, right? So I was brought up that Sir Winston Churchill was a great leader. You're Indian. Sir Winston Churchill is not popular in India. He's not popular in Australia or New Zealand, where he led failures. He's not popular with South Africans, but he was popular at a particular time in history when a very directive leader was required for the British people during the Second World War. So leadership is always measured by context and the leadership style to engage the followers at that time.
Okay, now I think this is good. So what I'm understanding from you is that I don't need a title to be leader. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, that is one way. I mean, that is one way of interpreting, what I said. I was doing a presentation for a company, and I think let me just keep the company vague for the moment. A very, very large company that had flown all their leaders into India. They were at the Taj when the bombs went off, when the terrorists hit the Taj Hotel, and the entire senior leadership of a multi-billion organization were in that hotel. Now, since the Manchester United aircraft disaster, HR often tries not to fly everybody on the same plane, but they all turn up at the same conference or convention. So the entire leadership is now at risk. A multi-billion-dollar organization is at risk. And everybody's being the leader. "Oh, we should do this, we should do this." And it was a 24-year-old assistant manager of the hotel that led those leaders to safety. She said, and they all tried to say, "Well, you're a girl and, let us be the man." And she said, "No, you're in my hotel. This is my job." And she led them through the kitchens to safety. And at their leadership conference, they talk about how she stepped up to leadership in that moment.
Awesome. This is fantastic story. I was looking for one of those to kind of corroborate what you were saying. Now, one of your work, I think I'll jump around a bit. Andrew. One of his work is working with executives, C-level executives, take them forward in their journey. What what do you, when you talk to many of them across different cultures, what are the common challenges you see these guys are facing?
Well, fundamentally, the challenge that most people on their career track to a C-suite position is that they are taught an old model. They are taught that, get a good education, go to work, get a good job, work really hard, deliver results, go the extra mile, and you will make it to a C-suite position. Now, unfortunately, this is a little bit of a fairy tale because there are many fantastic people with a great education who've worked their tail off in organizations and they're not being promoted. They're not breaking through. So clearly, something is missing in what they're being told. Now, for a number of years, I have been helping people to break through into the C-suite. And I'm uniquely positioned because I work with C-suite leaders on one side of the door and I help people to get through that door. And I know what's on the other side of the door. And C-suite leaders have self-leadership. And I've written 2 books on self-leadership, which is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. So firstly, they have self-leadership. Secondly, they have executive presence. And I define executive presence as the ability to project confidence and gravitas under pressure, as well as the ability to read the room. And this leads us into the third thing that they need for the new model is influence capital, the ability to manage stakeholders so that they are tapped on the shoulder for that senior leadership position. So it's not about working harder because most people watching this are already well-educated and working harder. Now, there might be some area of their education they need to develop for a senior leadership position, but mostly that's not the decision. The decision is this person the one that's going to be tapped on the shoulder? So therefore, they must have visibility and the right kind of visibility. And that's what I work with my clients on developing.
Where does, sorry, I might sound a bit shallow here, Andrew, in front of you, but where does stakeholder management fit in here?
Well, the stakeholder management comes in the influence capital piece, right? Okay. So it starts all the way through with self-leadership because a self-leader, of course, is taking ownership and responsibility, clarifying accountabilities. And so therefore, part 1 of stakeholder management is, a clear communication and understanding of expectations. And again, this is where a lot of people fail. They work really hard on the wrong things. I remember many, many, many years ago coaching somebody who had moved from the creative design space into a very corporate space. And he'd been hired for his genius in designing office space, right? And he was working for this company that was doing the whole leasing and for large organizations. And they asked me to coach him. And this was remedial coaching. Most of the work I do is developmental, but somebody said, hey, Andrew, we've hired this guy. Can you help him out? And I said to him, how's it going? And he said, well, it's really stressful. And I said, why? He said, because I work really hard during the week and my boss isn't happy with my output. And I said, well, how does it go? He said, well, the beginning of the week, I get briefed. I go, okay, great. So how much of that brief do you understand? He said, about 70%. So I said, what do you do with the other 30% of the expectation? He said, I spend the whole week trying to anticipate what it was. And I said, well, why don't you ask for clarification? He said, am I allowed to do that? Mm-hmm. And you see the problem. This is a creative, intelligent, wonderful individual who is terrified. And you talk about good bosses. A good boss would have spotted that gap and created a psychological safe space for this individual to say, hey, I don't quite get that, right? Yeah. And what a waste of energy. Because, if we're going to put our work, we need clear expectations. So that starts with self-leadership. His ability to say, hey, I'm owning this project myself. I don't have all the information I need to ask. That would be in the self-leadership. The executive presence is the confidence to say, yeah, I can deliver the results if I have all the information and the resources.
So I think there's a lot of emphasis on self-leadership, Andrew, from you, isn't it? Whenever I'm talking about leadership, we're talking about self-leadership more, isn't it? Is that...
Well, because you can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. I've been talking about self-leadership since 1999. My 2012 book is used on MBA program. My 2016 book on self-leadership became a bestseller. And in my 2020 book, the New Leadership Playbook, one of the 7 leadership principles is self-leadership comes first. Because we can't lead others unless we first lead ourselves, because self-leadership contains self-awareness, self-learning, and self-regulation. Without self-awareness, we can't be aware of other people. There's a direct correlation. I mean, if your boss doesn't have self-awareness, you will know it. And they don't understand you. They have expectations, but they don't have understanding. So I always start with self-leadership. And then, of course, the executive presence and the executive functions, and then moving into the influence capital.
That's nice. So a bit of a thing on self-leadership here. When you're talking about self-leadership, any best case study you have, anything you've seen somewhere, an example to quote?
Okay, well, let me share with you a story of from my latest book. Beginning of the pandemic, I'm coaching a CEO who I've known for many years, and in fact is a very good self-leader. Typically, he's a very good self-leader. But at the beginning of the pandemic, he had just been dropped into a new organization by a venture capital firm, and he was super excited. He had a fantastic runway. I'd flown to the US. We'd done his rebranding, his relaunch. I'd helped him select his executive leadership team. Everything was on the runway in January 2020 for a stellar rise of this organization. And this was going to be the success for the CEO. And everything was there. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. Anyway, I get on. I'd flown back to, I don't know whether I was back in Singapore, I was in Portugal here. And I'm on the phone to the CEO. And I mean, figuratively, he was in the fetal position, sucking his thumb. He was like, it's all about me, I mean, my runway, my goals, my objectives. And I said, hang on a moment, bit of self-awareness here. It's not about you. You're the CEO. How are your people doing? How are they coping with this? I mean, you're in the nice house, driving the nice, the latest Tesla. All right. Things are going to be okay for you. But what about your people? He was like, oh. And suddenly he was able to switch. He had the self-leadership to take the focus off himself and start focusing on his people. And that company, by the way, I just caught up with him last week, and they've had 3 great quarters. So they came through the pandemic, came out the other side. And he did something that I teach all of my coachees, whether they're senior managers wanting to become C-suite leaders or C-suite leaders, and that is an acronym, AAA. It's in this book. It's in this book that's behind me, my latest one. Accept, adjust, advance. Accept the reality. It is what it is, right? You cannot blame and complain. A key element of the lack of self-leadership is blaming and complaining. It's not my fault. It's their fault. It's the economy. It's the pandemic. It's the culture. Stop blaming. Stop complaining. Start taking ownership. Adjust your behaviors to the new reality, and then you advance towards your objectives. So it assumes you have objectives.
That's $1 million thing you told me. I needed it actually, because I told you that our company is in transition. Now, self-awareness you talked about, right? And I think I had a CEOs earlier who told me one thing, that self-awareness is the starting point, which Andrew, you're talking about. How do you develop that? How to create that? It's not easy. It's easier said than done.
Well, it is. You don't know what you don't know, right? Stupid people don't know they're stupid, right? So it's everybody else that suffers. Look, self-awareness is realizing that we are constantly running a narrative, and you need to become aware of the narrative. Now, there are a number of gateways to self-awareness. Sometimes a situation comes and you have this epiphany, the road to Damascus moment. You have this sudden realization, hey, this isn't working out for me. And it could be a health crisis. It could be a divorce. It could be it could be getting fired. And suddenly you have this awareness. I mean, the famous Steve Jobs, when he got fired from Apple, went to India to meditate and discover what his real purpose was. Sometimes it's dramatic like that, and sometimes it's just a slow evolution. So mindfulness, meditation, journaling are great ways to start developing your self-awareness, recognizing that narrative. What am I telling myself about this situation? And having that separation, and sometimes it's known as the balcony view. So I'll take you through a little exercise, and your listeners and viewers for this. And I use the example of a dance. So if you had a high school graduation dance, this is a good example. But if you went to a dance, you would have the perspective of being on the dance floor. You would be aware of your own feet, the sound of the music, and if you're dancing with somebody, your partner. But you would be limited in terms of your view. You wouldn't necessarily be able to see the band or the DJ. You would be able to see the people immediately around you, but that's about it. As a human being, we have this ability to zoom out or step back from our experience and imagine we're stepping on a balcony or looking down from a balcony. So simultaneously to being on the dance floor, you can always have the viewpoint of, if I was looking at a balcony at myself on that dance floor, what else would I see? Okay. Well, I'd see myself, I'd see my partner, I'd see the people around me, but now I have a broader perspective of the groups. How are people clustered? Are there people at the bar? Are there people standing around the DJ or the band? Are there people sitting down? Are there other conversations happening? So I get a broader context. And that's a great place to start with self-awareness, is in what context am I in? And you notice I've used this word a great deal in this podcast, the awareness of context. Now, that's not enough to really be a self-leader, because there is a raft of you. If you could zoom out one more time to the ceiling or the rafters of that building and look down at the balcony of yourself, observing yourself on the dance floor, you could ask the questions: what bias, what narrative, what frame am I bringing to my observation? What filter am I using to evaluate? Is it a good dance? Is it a bad dance? Is it good music? Is it bad music? Are they good people? Are they bad people? What is my role in this? And this ability to zoom out and really challenge the frame of the reality is what gives us the ultimate freedom from all of our conditioning. And this is where self-leadership and self-awareness starts.
Awesome. Now, again, leadership styles. I just want to talk about what I feel personally, that there is a corporate world, there is a world which is started by entrepreneurs. So I think I take extreme examples. I take example of Elon Musk, for example, and I take example of a corporate CEO, for example, IBM. Now, I find a lot of difference, I mean, in their leadership behavior, leadership styles. Have you seen something like that? Or has your mind thought about that sometime?
Well, of course, because leadership styles is one third of that leadership algorithm of leadership style, followers, behavior, and motivation, and the environment. Now, I mean, you used IBM. IBM's an interesting example because they acquired Red Hat, and Red Hat was a middleware software company which was built on open source. And in fact, I have some firsthand experience of, the clash of cultures between IBM's top-down corporate style of doing things and Red Hat's very open source, everybody has an opinion, everybody contributes culture. And so, I was around pre the acquisition and post-acquisition. So look, again, it comes down to environment. An entrepreneur is driven by risk. Entrepreneur comes from the French word entreprendre, to undertake risk, or the risk of a journey. The word was coined by the French economist Jean-Baptiste Say, who was a student of John Smith, Adam Smith, the Scottish economist. And an entrepreneur doesn't have a business plan. I mean, quite honestly, I teach on MBA programs, and people have business plans. An entrepreneur sees an opportunity and constantly iterates, right, minimum viable product to find what works. Corporates want 5-year strategic plans.
Yeah. Amazing.
Right.
Amazing.
So the distinction is between style and context, right? Are you somebody who likes 5, 10, 25-year plans, or are you somebody who's very comfortable being in the moment with what we would call in self-leadership psychology, self-efficacy? I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I'll work it out. Right now, somebody in an organization is going to be terrified with that answer. All right, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I can work it out. But that is exactly the kind of people that we need. Now, there are organizations that recognize that you need to isolate the creativity, the innovation from the day-to-day business. And I remember walking into Visa's office in Singapore, and the floor I walked into was the corporate one, and they were talking to me about what they needed. And then I went downstairs, and they have a whole different floor for the innovation. And the people were dressed differently. The coffee was better. There was a coffee stand. And these people were coming up with the new and innovative products. And I'm like, I know where I fit. All right. I fit where the good coffee is, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you know where you fit. So sometimes the issue is fit, right? You've got somebody who is great at breaking things, right? Now, I moved from Australia to Asia. I'm British by birth, but I lived in Australia for 18 years. My client was Singapore Airlines, and they hired me to bring in the coaching into Singapore Airlines, and I loved it. It was great, but I had double culture clash. I was a white, very directive individual in Asia, which is obviously not white and very humility driven and participative. That was clash number one, and clash number two. Singapore Airlines, by nature, is very rule driven. And here I was saying, this is how you break the rules, and so there was this double clash, and we had to negotiate this, right? I had a great learning experience from that.
Okay, so I'm kind of a bit in the same boat now. I think one thing on decision making, Andrew, you work around the culture, work with people. It's very fact based all the time. It's and you talked about intuition. I saw on your LinkedIn. How does that work? I mean, the role of intuition in decision making. Because if you go to an organized structure, 5-year plans, 6-year plans, look at Wall Street, looking at perfect numbers. What's your view on that?
Well, I think perfect numbers don't exist, right? Okay. So, I mean, right now, the US is, the globe is experiencing inflation, and everybody is saying, oh, well, the reason for inflation is X. But inflation is an algorithm. It's a supply-demand algorithm. And, sometimes we don't know if the problem is supply or demand. I mean, it's a combination of, war in Ukraine, inability to get products from factories. So it's a bit of an algorithm. So the issue is, if you've got the facts, make the decision on the facts. Absolutely. If you don't, then you're going to have to trust intuition. Now, what is intuition? Intuition is our brain's ability to model and observe patterns. Now, let me give you an example. I studied hypnosis, and I read this huge textbook on hypnosis. And I remember one phrase in this whole book. I read the whole book, but there's one phrase that stuck with me. If you're going to trust your unconscious, you better put something in there in the first place, right? Because your unconscious is drawing on some facts. Now, I love chess. Chess is a game of strategy. You can learn the chess openings. You can learn the Queen's Gambit. You can learn the King's Pawn opening. You can learn the various lines. You can study chess. But you watch a great chess player, and they seem to have this intuition. But what is it really? It's pattern recognition. Now, I like to get better at chess. Every morning, I play chess puzzles against the computer. It gives me an example, and I have a few seconds to respond to it. And it challenges me because I don't have necessarily the time to work out all the permutations. I don't have the time to look up the best line. I have to recognize the pattern. What is my opponent trying to do? What is my opportunity? What is my risk? What am I going to do? And I love doing that. And I recommend all of my coaches learn to play chess, because it's a great metaphor for life. I don't know all of the variations. I can't. I'm not a computer. But if I base it on my previous games, my previous experience, I can make a best case scenario. And that's what a good leader does. I don't have all the facts, but I have to make a decision. So I'm going to make it based on all of the data that I do have and the models that I have. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to make a new decision, and I'm going to update my models. And that last bit is the bit that really distinguish between the great leaders and the okay leaders, because they update their models. Because remember, self-leadership contains self-learning. If I try something and it doesn't work a couple of times, I'm not going to do that again, particularly in chess, because I'm going to lose.
No, it's amazing. So I think, Andrew, COVID has been a big game changer, for our lives as well, and, how does this affect your thinking on leadership? I mean, uh, did you kind of, in the remote world, does the definition change, thinking change? What have you gone through on that?
No, I don't think so. I think that
Okay.
we have to always go back to fundamentals. But the subtitle of my new book, The New Leadership Playbook, is Being Human
Okay.
Whilst Delivering Accelerated Results. And I think what the pandemic has clearly done is proved that hybrid work is possible, that human beings, if you give them the right ownership and the right accountability, they can actually produce. We saw, logistics, supply chain operated from home. We saw people do amazing things. And then the pandemic has theoretically ended. It's an endemic now. And we see major companies demand people to go back to the office. I had a potential coaching client called me from seeing one of my videos on LinkedIn or YouTube. I don't remember which. And he was saying he worked for a company. He's fundamentally the one below the CTO. His company has demanded he goes back to his cubicle on a floor where nobody else is in IT and all of his team work in a different city or different cities. And he has a sick wife at home, and he was producing at 120, 150% during the pandemic. And now he's being asked, for what reason, to go back to the office? He can do everything from his laptop, right? And access security. So there's a stupidity that's coming in. Now, I understand why organizations want you to come back into the office. There is a certain creativity and relationships that happen when everybody's connected. But it doesn't have to be 40 hours a week, 9 to 5. Now, there were great examples of how the pandemic was incredibly empowering for women who had children. They could during the day when the kids were up, they could answer the urgent emails, but they did their best work between 7 and 11 p.m. when the kids were asleep, and they had their ability to do that. Now, leaders have to say, let's measure the engagement and let's measure the output, not by how many hours they're sat behind a desk in an office. That is so archaic. That's the 1900s and factory lines. So wake up and smell the coffee. Now we have proved that you can build teams of the best talent around the world with both synchronous and asynchronous work using technology. Then the asynchronous bit is where people had to learn, how do I set an expectation and not have the person work on that immediately, but then do that. And I myself, as an entrepreneur, have teams working in different time zones, delivering me pieces of information or pieces of work, which I then pass on to another team after I've made my notes, and it's happening at different times. So a leader has to understand that they're dealing with humans and technology. And that's the other thing that the pandemic has done, is it's accelerated the digitization. We see the AI, and we need to see this technology as the partner. And those people that are great employees are the ones that can partner with technology rather than see it as competition.
So what I'm trying to say, that is there anything like humanity or being humane, all that has become more important, or is it equally important as it was?
Well, I think it's always been important. I think it got overlooked, right? I think, and I was very disappointed. And I mean, obviously, you mentioned Elon Musk. I was very disappointed when Elon said, everybody has to come to work.
That's pathetic of him. That's pathetic of him.
I was very surprised. I mean, Elon is different, and not everything he does is fantastic, but he clearly has a disruptive brain, and he clearly has great vision. His leadership style, of course, is disruptive, and it's very future and possibility oriented.
He's a rare talent.
Yeah, absolutely. But with everybody comes a little bit of craziness, and I was disappointed when he said that, because that really showed a lack of vision around how we can get the best out of people.
Yeah.
I was recently doing a keynote speech in Sweden with a company that is in machine and tooling, and they have survived and thrived during the pandemic, And they're struggling. They're wanting to get their people back to work, but at least they're asking the question, how can we create a psychologically safe environment where people want to come back, at least part-time, so that we can collaborate and move the organization forwards? And how can we respect and acknowledge the challenges that they're facing in their own families? So they're asking the hard questions. And it was lovely to be asked to speak to an organization that is prepared to ask those questions, because honestly, nobody knows all of the answers, but we have to recognize that if you can automate everything, well, go, by all means do it. But that is not the way we move forwards. Every organization has the humanity, it has human beings at the heart of it. And if you are not getting the best from them, you're clearly not being the best leader.
I think the thing with probably Elon is that when he thinks of people, he thinks of engineers, and he thinks for the place for engineers is shop. Come to the shop, see the car, how it is. He doesn't think about, how he's said a lot of nasty things about MBAs.
I know. I understand the context. And I mean, sometimes you've got to put your hands, you've got to be in the room. And clearly, building a car remotely through video may not be the right way. You've got to touch it, you've got to feel it, you've got to sound, you've got to hear the sound of the engine. And to his credit, when Tesla was in trouble, he went and slept at the factory. And that was a great piece of hands-on leadership, where he's saying, rather than yell and scream at people, I'm going to go and experience what they're experiencing. I'm not going to ask anybody to do what I wouldn't do. So on the one hand, that was very people orientated. On the other hand, he was doing that. So I think perhaps his comment was taken out of context, or his intention was missed, or he failed in effective communication.
Well, he fails many times. He fails all the time.
We're all humans. And we all fail in framing our expectations. Back to my very first examples are in this conversation. It's all about getting that understanding backwards and forwards. And this is a constant iteration of communication, whether we're using asynchronization like Slack or WhatsApp or email, or whether we're doing face-to-face conversation. We need to make sure, instead of just saying, do you understand? Because if you ask somebody, do you understand? They pretty much always say what? Yes. The question is, do they understand? Well, most of my audience, when I ask them this, will say, well, no. And I would counter with, yes, they do understand, but they understand what they understand. Right? If you want to improve your leadership instantaneously, get better at asking questions and listening to the response.
Amazing.
Not do you understand, but what do you understand? Right? And you can frame it. People are terrified of asking that question because they're worried it's going to be condescending. Just so we're on the same page, what is it you understand by what I just said?
Yeah. It's amazing. I think it's a simple thing, but very powerful. And do 2 or 3 questions more. 2 are a little controversial. And you can say whatever. Now, we talked about CEOs, right? And are the CEOs and leaders, they go together? You have talked to so many C-level, very senior. What do you make out? Are they superhuman?
You don't get to be CEO because you're stupid. You get to be a CEO because you delivered some results. You have some skills. And all of the CEOs I've worked with are above average in terms of some level of skill set or contribution or value, right? Otherwise, everybody could be a CEO. So they clearly have, but they are human. So their strengths in one area and maybe not in others, right? My good friend Marshall Goldsmith, who is a fellow coach, wrote a book with a fantastic title, which is "What Got You Here Won't Get You There."
It's right in front of me. It's right in front of me.
Yeah, and so Marshall makes a great point, and I'm super jealous of the title, because I think it's just a brilliant title. What got you here won't get you there. And the premise of that is, sometimes the CEO was previously the CFO or the COO. So what are they going to bring, right? The CFO is going to bring a very financial viewpoint to his leadership position. The COO will bring a very operations view. The CMO will bring a very marketing view. So the CEO has to understand, I'm going to play to my strengths, but I mustn't overplay my strengths. So a good CEO recognizes, hey, I got strengths, otherwise I wouldn't have got here. The board wouldn't have backed me, or I wouldn't have got the success of the company. but clearly I have a blind spot. I'm going to oversee, if I'm the CMO, I'm going to oversee everything. Everything's marketing, everything's marketing. And if I'm the CFO, everything's finance, everything's finance. It's unusual for the chief people officer to make it to the CEO, but that would be interesting, right? Because then everything would be people, people, people. So the important thing is to recognize what is my strengths and build a team around me in the area I'm not so strong.
That's again, right? Self-awareness is coming into picture.
Again, it's the self-awareness, right? Nobody's good at everything. If you look at a sports team, right? If you look at whether it's American football, whether it's soccer, even if it's cricket, right? Somebody is a better batsman than they are a fielder, right? And or a bowler, right? So okay, he's a really good bowler, he's an okay batsman, and he's an okay fielder, right? So we play to our strengths, and we should do that. We should never deny our strengths, but we should be aware of where our areas of weakness, not necessarily build those weaknesses up because we're not going to get the benefit, but partner with somebody. And some of the great organizations, I mean, Steve Jobs, right, did have Tim Cook.
Yeah.
Right? Bill Gates did have Obama. Now, those two ICs, right, absolutely make great two ICs. And some people make fantastic two ICs. They are the rock to the CEO. A good CEO would have a full bench, and the work I do with organizations is to make sure they have a great executive leadership team.
Full bench is a very critical point.
A full bench. So because a CEO doesn't have to do it all.
Yeah.
They have to be the visionary to make sure everybody else wants to do it all. Yeah. And to do that, you have to know your strengths, and you need to get good people around you.
Okay, amazing. Now, one question, and this is a bit tricky. And have you noticed one thing, Andrew, why Asians are not so many CEOs? I mean, again, look, I look at US companies, Microsoft, IBM, Google. Yeah, I see all Asians. I look at Australia, I look at UK, hard to find. What's playing around here? Is it the Asians don't make the good leaders, or?
No, it's not that. So this is tricky because I need to talk about culture and ethnicity for a moment.
Yeah.
So, anybody listening, understand that, this is a white male speaking. And so I'm in deep trouble here, but here's my experience. There is a definite stereotype of leader, that they are a little more extrovert, a little bit more present, a little bit more visible. Now, in Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, or mainland China, right, there is a huge value for humility. I don't want to step up. I don't want to shine the spotlight. So what I've done, and I've helped people from mainland China, from India, from Southeast Asia to become C-level executives in global companies. So it does happen. And as you mentioned, South Asians clearly overwhelm the IT industry. But what I've had to do is reframe humility. What does humility mean? Right? A lot of people in Asia think that humility means making yourself less than somebody else, downplaying, not putting yourself forwards. That's not what humility means at all. Humility comes from the Latin humilitas, which means grounded in your strength. Right? We want good, strong people. If you're going to rely on somebody, you want that they know their stuff and they're confident in their stuff. So humility means grounded. In 2000, Tangmi published some research, and she said that humility is an accurate, neither overestimated nor underestimated view of your own ability, and the ability to consider other people's perspectives as equally valid as your own. And that one's tricky, by the way, because some people will say, well, I know what I'm good at, but they don't consider other people's perspectives. Now, let's look at South Asia, for instance, Indians, and the IT industry. You clearly have Satya Nadella at the top of Microsoft. The CEO of Google is clearly an Indian. And yet I have had this conversation with an Indian, very competent leader on the way to the top. And he said, oh, well, I can't make it to the top in a global company because I'm Indian. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Who's Satya Nadella, right? Who's running Google? They're Indians. Oh, but not me. I come from a small village. And I'm like, you are holding on to a narrative that's not relevant. And I could have had that same conversation with a Vietnamese or a Chinese or a Thai. The issue is the ability to project gravitas.
Okay.
Forget your nationality, right? Now, certainly there is a concept within organizations of the old boys network. If everybody went to the same university and they're hiring their friends, that is not fair, but life is never fair. Who told you life was fair, right? But where you come from should not be a negative narrative for yourself. Now, you will face bias. Bias exists, but don't be pre-biased yourself, right? So get rid of that. Where you come from is irrelevant. It's what you're going to do and what you're going to develop. And you have to then have the narrative that I am valuable and I'm going to add value. And when you have that as a narrative, your ethnicity, the place of your birth, the time of your birth, your star sign, whatever, means diddly squat, right? And that's what Satcher did successfully.
Amazing. And the last question, mental health. You work with so many of these people stressed out, burnt out, I don't know, some of them managing well. What have you seen? Let's say, what's the best way to manage? You're an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, big name in the leadership industry. How do you manage stress, and how do you see these guys managing stress or mental health?
Okay. So again, let me give you a very simple formula. For the engineers, and I work a lot with engineers, so I like to make things a formula because they go, "Oh, well, that makes sense."
You talked about formula several times.
Sorry, what?
You talked about formula several times.
I know, and I mean, my first degree was, contained a large amount of biomechanics. So,
Okay.
So I understand. So the formula for stress is equal to 1 over perceived control. Okay. So stress is inversely proportional to perceived control. I.e., if I feel out of control, my stress goes up, right? And you mentioned you followed me on LinkedIn and saw my kids. When my kids traveled from Australia to Portugal, where I am, on their own. They're 15 and 16, and they got lost by the airline in Madrid airport, and I had to go full on Liam Neeson, to make sure they were looked after. And I felt stressed because I was in Portugal, they were in Spain. I could get in my car and drive to Madrid airport. It was 6 hours away, but right then I was hands off. And I'm on the phone to my kids and imparting what they needed to do to get out of that situation. Now, I felt stressed because I couldn't control everything. And everybody understands this. But I did what I teach everybody. I accepted, okay, this is a situation. I adjusted. What can I do? Who can I get on the phone to? How can I support my kids? What can I control? Because if I lose my SHIT, my kids are going to get more anxious. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the only thing we can control is our own breath. Sometimes we just have to take a breath. A friend of mine teaches, smell the flower, blow the candle. Smell the flower, blow the candle. Okay, fine. I've taken control of my breath. What else can I take control of? Okay, I can take control of who can I email, who can I call? What can I do? And the secret is, what can I do right now in this moment? Now, I've been teaching self-leadership since 1999. I was deeply influenced by the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who wrote The Man's Search for Meaning. He had lost all control. He was a prisoner in
Nazis,
a camp.
with Nazis, yeah.
Yeah, and he was going to the gas chambers. And he said, the last of all human freedoms is the ability to choose our own attitude. And it starts with that. So, with people who are managing huge number of balls in the air, I go, okay, let's focus. What do you have control over? That's the first. That's the core. You can control your thinking, your feeling, your words, your actions, your self-leadership. Now that you've got control of yourself, what can you influence and how can you influence? You can't influence anybody else if you can't influence yourself. So once you've got the self-leadership, and then stress becomes manageable. Stress is always there. If there was no stress, I wouldn't have got out of bed this morning, taken a shower, and got on a Zoom call with you, Rajeev.
I think, Andrew, on that note, thank you so much. And I can tell you that you're amazing. And I learned so much. And, I feel grateful that you came and gave me time. I'm really thankful to you. And thanks to Ron as well for getting you on here. I'll get in touch with you again. Thank you, sir.
Dhanyavad, shukriya.
Thank you. That's in context. Okay, cool. Bye.